Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. As you know, I was a rabbi in Caracas for more than 4 decades. I don't know how many weddings I officiated, maybe a couple of thousand. How many bar mitzvah celebrations I participated, how many people I accompanied when they passed away. Matzeva, when you dedicate a tombstone. How many of these events I really participated, I really don't know. But many, many. And it's very important. And I always used to tell myself, you have done already 50 weddings, 100 weddings, 1,000 weddings. But remember, for this couple, it's their first time. Make sure that you feel that also. I had to tell myself that in order not to fall into a routine. I remember we also had, bar mitzvah celebrations on Shabbat. That was the main celebration. During the week, the boys started putting on tefillin, but on Shabbat, the family was called to the Torah. And so, however, that began disappearing because in the Sephardic world, they don't do that much. And also because you couldn't leave a photographic testimony because we didn't allow photographs to be taken in the synagogue on the Shabbat. And and if you don't have a photograph, well, the event just didn't happen. So eventually it all was done on either a Thursday or a Monday, and that's it, or Rosh Chodesh when the Torah is read. However, there's one difficulty with that, which is the following. Only 3 people on a Monday or Thursday are called to the Torah. On Rosh Chodesh 4, but it's 3 people usually that are called to the Torah. And according to Jewish tradition, you have to call first a Kohen. Then you call a Levi, and then you call a Israel. Levi, the Kohen and Levi are from the same tribe, but the Kohanim were the ones that did the sacrifice in the Beit HaMikdash. The Leviim were teachers, also participated in the Beit HaMikdash, but did not do the sacrifices themselves. They sang songs, Tehillim, and so on. And most of us are Israel. Now, what do you do with a family that don't have a Kohen who is a grandfather or somebody whom they want to honor? There are only 3 people that can be called to the Torah. So we used to do the following, not entirely kosher, but that's what we did. You asked the Kohen or the 2 Kohanim that were present in the synagogue, who could have been guests, friends of the family, you know what? Just before the reading of the Torah, please step out of the synagogue so that when we start reading the Torah, there is no Kohen. So if there is no Kohen present, we call an Israel in its place, and we're able to call 3 Israels that way. Well, I remember on one occasion, one Kohen came over to me afterwards. He was incensed. He is a Kohen. What do you mean he wasn't called to the reading of the Torah? That's his privilege. And I said to myself, a couple of weeks ago, I saw you driving by on Shabbat in a car. Come on, you're not an observant fellow. Yet he wanted to be called to the Torah. I remember also reading in Israel, a fellow with his son went to a funeral. And when they got to the place where the corpse lay already in a certain building, the father said to his son, we can't go any further because we are not allowed to be under the same roof with a dead person. But that same Cohen didn't observe really Jewish traditions. And he told his son, remember, we are Cohen, and for generations we have done this. We do not go into a place where there is a dead person. And I said to myself, this is hypocrisy. Come on, he doesn't observe everything. He observes just what he likes. But as time passes by, I really think of something else, kudos, the other way around. There are certain things that are part of the personality of this individual. He is a Cohen, and he does not want to give that up. He may do other things, but he does not want to give up the fact that he is a Cohen. To the contrary, chapeau. I admire the person for being that consistent with the fact that he is a Cohen. Well, this is, I think, Very important, you know. I remember a rabbi, my teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, used to say, why is it that you really call a Cohen, a Levi, and an Israel to the reading of the Torah? Because they are representative of the entire Jewish people. We are either one of those three. We belong to one of those three. So those three represent all us because the reading of the Torah is a reenactment. You think that you're once again in Mount Sinai when God gave the Torah and the entire Jewish people was there. So they represent the entire Jewish people. And I said to myself, you know, how can you feel at the reading of the Torah? You're standing in Mount Sinai, really? But in essence, this is what my teacher was saying. You have to renew your commitment every time. When you read the Torah, you have to think you're receiving the Torah for the first time. You know, the person who finishes the reading of the Torah on Simchat Torah, who is given the privilege to read the last few verses of the Torah, is called Chatan Torah. What is Chatan? Chatan means, you know, he is el novio in Spanish. He's the groom. He's not the husband. He's the groom. In other words, you're not yet the husband. You always have to think that you're standing at the wedding ceremony. You know, he's a chatan at the wedding ceremony, and our rabbis say that actually when God gave the Torah was like a wedding. God is the groom and we are the bride. He gave us the Torah. That is the celebration that we have. And I think to myself, how can I experience once again that this is the first time I am doing that? How can I once again think that this didn't happen before? I remember, you know, the first time I went to Israel, I went with Elal, and a few minutes before landing, you heard through the loudspeakers, the Barry sisters, a group, an American group, singing what? Heveinu Shalom Aleichem. You know, and the music I'd heard a million times, but it wasn't like hearing it then. It was the first time I was going to land in Israel, and I really had tears in my eyes because it was an extraordinary privilege. I lived at a time when there was a Jewish state. For 2,000 years, there was no Jewish state. And look at where I'm living. You know, it was like renewing my relationship with the land of Israel. Our ancestors had gone into Israel after 40 years in the desert led by Joshua. I was again entering the land of Israel. And many a time I feel a certain amount of envy for those people that go to Israel for the first time, because I can't go to Israel for the first time anymore. I did it already. So how do I renew somehow this relationship that I have with Israel? In a sense, life demands of me to renew constantly my relationships. Don't take him for granted. Don't take for granted your relationship with your family, with your spouse, with society. You have to renew it at all times. You know, when you dance on Simchas Torah with the Torah, you have to dance as if the Torah is a bride. It's a groom and a bride. It is a renewing once again. Well, when this pandemic is going to finish, and we are going to go into the streets, we're going to embrace each other, we're going to do everything we used to do as a routine. Are you going to do it really as a routine, or are you going to think differently? You know, you have a privilege. It's renewal. Thank God I can do this once again. I think that we will appreciate reality much more because of this pandemic. I can't explain it. I don't know why God sent it to us. But one thing is for sure, we're never going to take for granted the things, the privileges that we have every day, because we have to renew our lives constantly.